Not long ago, our 3A review attempted to quantify the performance improvement of each generation of Snapdragon 8 from the first to the fifth generation using real-world testing. This time, we plan to improve our algorithm and retest the performance gains of each generation of MediaTek's Dimensity Flagship SoC. Indeed, judging from online reviews, MediaTek's Flagship SoC releases each year always generate polarized opinions. For example, some say the Dimensity 9200 CPU isn't aggressive enough, the Dimensity 9300's cache is too small for all the big cores, and the Kilogram 9400 is just a larger case and too incremental. But how noticeable are these perceived shortcomings? How much has each generation of Dimensity Flagship SoC actually improved? In this video, we'll try to quantify them and see which generation of Dimensity Flagship SoC, despite its perceived shortcomings, has the biggest performance improvement and which can be considered incremental. Although we tried our best to control variables, the performance of the models equipped with the recent generations of Dimensity Flagship SoCs was relatively inconsistent. Basically, half of the models used the standard version and the other half used the overclocked version with Plus. Therefore, we could only keep the standard version, which meant we couldn't keep the operators from using the same brand. We have compiled a table of relevant models and system versions. You can pause to view it. Let's first look at the theoretical performance. For CPU-related tests, we used Geekbench 6.7 for single-core performance. As the flagship of 2026, the Dimensity 9500 single-core performance is 162% higher than the Dimensity 1200 from 5 years ago, and the multi-core performance is more than doubled, with an even greater improvement. However, when spread over each year, some are quite different. The biggest change is naturally from the Dimensity 1200 in 2021 to the Dimensity 9000 in 2022, with a single-core performance improvement of over 50%. The multi-core performance also increased by 36.9%, but it wasn't the biggest increase. After the Dimensity 9200 switched from a 13+4 small-core architecture to the Dimensity 9300's all-large-core architecture, multi-core performance improved by 40%, but single-core performance only increased by 13.4%. Many viewers previously stated that single-core performance is more important than multi-core performance, so we calculated their overall CPU performance increase based on a 60% plus and 40% ratio for single-core performance. The Dimensity 9000 naturally had the highest increase at 46%. The Dimensity 9200 was the most incrementally powerful of the 5 generations, but it still achieved an 11% performance improvement. Compared to the CPU performance of the flagship Dimensity series, the GPU improvement was much more normal. From the Dimensity 1200 to the Dimensity 9500, the raster performance improved by over 500%. Looking at the annual increases, the largest increase was naturally from the Dimensity 1200 to the Dimensity 9000, reaching 71%. Although the Dimensity 9200 was once criticized for incremental improvements, its GPU performance still exceeded 70% compared to the Dimensity 9000. Theoretically, almost every generation of Dimensity flagship SoCs doesn't suffer from incremental upgrades, especially in GPU performance. Even the Dimensity 9500, with the smallest improvement, still saw a more than 20% increase compared to its predecessor. However, MediaTek's recent flagship SoCs have all used ARM's reference architecture. If the architectural improvements aren't significant, it will still have some impact on performance. Of course, everyone's perception and evaluation of performance are different. So, what kind of performance improvement do you think is acceptable and not considered incremental? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. Besides benchmark scores, we also need to look at energy efficiency. We set up 2 scenarios, one of which was 4K 60 frames per second online video playback. We monitored the power consumption of each model while playing a 10-minute video. It's important to note that although the tests were conducted in the same environment, screen power consumption cannot be fully controlled. Previous 1080p screens consumed more power than current 1.5K screens, so the relevant test data is for reference only. In terms of power consumption alone, the Dimensity 1200 and Dimensity 9000 generations consumed over 20,000 watts of power when watching videos, but the Dimensity 9200 and later generations can achieve just over 1 watt. In terms of improvement, the Dimensity 9200 has the largest increase, close to 15%, while the Dimensity 9500's improvement is smaller, less than 3%. Many users previously reported that the Dimensity SoC's video encoding and decoding were not very good, but in reality, today's flagship Dimensity SoCs rarely experience excessive power consumption under such extremely low load conditions. The second scenario is testing the older game Genshin Impact, but with all graphics settings maxed out. The average frame rate is divided by the average power consumption to calculate the frames per watt. In terms of gaming experience, starting with the Dimensity 9000 running Genshin Impact at 820p with all high settings. The current system is sufficient, although the storyline back then wasn't as aggressive as it is now. It would still lock the frame rate after running for a while. To truly run Genshin Impact perfectly at all high settings, you need the Dimensity 9300 generation. The average power consumption has also been significantly reduced, making Genshin Impact, once a performance killer, a game that only requires mid to low frequencies. Now, with the latest Dimensity 9500, it can achieve full frame rates while keeping the average power consumption below 40,000 watts, achieving 15.64 frames per watt. Compared to the Dimensity 9000 from 4 years ago, the energy efficiency has doubled. However, in terms of the rate of improvement, the Dimensity 9200, which was criticized for incremental upgrades a few years ago, saw the largest increase of over 30%, while the Dimensity 9000 saw the smallest. Although its gaming experience is indeed significantly better than the Dimensity 1200, its power consumption has also increased considerably. Therefore, in the end, its energy efficiency isn't actually very high. Does this seem counterintuitive to you? We calculated the overall performance improvement of these 5 generations of Dimensity flagship SoCs based on a ratio of 30% for CPU benchmark, 30% for GPU benchmark, 10% for video decoding energy efficiency, and 30% for gaming energy efficiency. The Dimensity 9000 generation naturally saw the highest improvement, exceeding 35%. While the Dimensity 950's overall performance improvement was the least noticeable, it still approached 20%. So, which generation of Dimensity flagship SoCs do you find the most significant performance improvement, and which is the least noticeable? Let's have a chat. Some might think only the 12th generation Dimensity flagship SoCs have a strong perceived improvement, while the others are just incremental upgrades. However, our test results show that some seemingly incremental SoCs actually have quite significant performance improvements. For example, from the Dimensity 9000 to the Dimensity 9200, the CPU improvement is indeed not very significant compared to the previous generation, but the GPU upgrade is substantial. Whether playing games or watching videos, the energy efficiency improvement is obvious. For example, the Dimensity 9300, although it doesn't have a generous cache for all the large cores, has significantly improved multi-core performance and actual energy efficiency compared to its predecessor. Therefore, it's inaccurate to say that this generation of SoCs is lacking in sincerity and just incremental improvements because of some shortcomings. In the past 4 years, the improvement of Dimensity flagship SoCs has been remarkable, and the deep cooperation and joint tuning between leading mobile phone manufacturers and MediaTek has made the old impression that MediaTek SoCs are difficult to tune increasingly less. However, as we mentioned earlier, these generations of flagship SoCs in Tianjin are actually based on the ARM reference architecture design. If the ARM reference architecture doesn't improve significantly in a certain aspect in any year, it may be fully reflected in the SoC. But this is not without room for maneuver. As long as the design is close enough, there can still be a significant improvement. The Dimensity 9300 with its all-large core architecture is a good example. Furthermore, there are rumors that the next generation top-tier flagship SoC, the Dimensity 9600 Pro, may be the first to use a dual ultra-large core architecture. In addition, MediaTek has been deeply collaborating with NVIDIA since 2023, so we might even see a flagship SoC with a dual ultra-large core CPU and an NVIDIA GPU in the future. Do you think that if such a product were to actually be made, the performance improvement would recreate the glory of the Dimensity 9000? That's all for this video. For more exciting content, please visit our Sany Reviews website or our account, same name on all platforms, for more information. See you next time, bye.